As investigators try to find out what happened to Jamal Khashoggi.
Saudi Arabia confirms that the journalist Jamal Khashoggi is dead.
Jamal Khashoggi's loved ones want some form of closure.
Saudi foreign minister saying this was all a terrible mistake.
The execution of Jamal Khashoggi, a frequent critic of the Saudi regime, inside the Saudi consulate.
Saudi Arabia, for 3 weeks, has been trying to fool the world here.
The killing of Jamal Khashoggi was a premeditated murder, and they're
On
now
October the
going to
1st, 2018, nothing seemed out of the ordinary in Belgrade Forest, north of Istanbul. It was a Monday, the start of the work week, and the fall weather drew few visitors. Just before sunset, CCTV cameras picked up a car belonging to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul as it passed through a security gate. It would later emerge in reports by Turkish daily Sabah that it was carrying the consulate's military attaché, Ahmed Abdullah al-Muzini, on what Turkish intelligence called a surveillance mission. According to Sabah, al-Muzini had returned from Saudi Arabia earlier that day with a plan to liquidate Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أقسم بالله العظيم أن أكون مخلصا لديني ثم لمليكي وبلادي وأن لا أبوح بسر من أسرار الدولة وأن أحافظ على مصالحها وأنظمتها.
On June 21st, 2017, Prince Mohammed bin Salman was appointed Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. The journalist Jamal Khashoggi had long been close to the royal family, but with the rise of Mohammed bin Salman, he'd fallen out of favour. Banned from writing and tweeting, he faced increasing repression and began to fear for his life. He fled the kingdom that same month, and though he remained supportive of the Saudi monarchy and the Crown Prince's 2030 reform agenda, he became a vocal critic of Saudi repression and policies from his self-imposed exile in the United States.
The pressure increased, I believe, in 2014 or 2015 when he was banned from writing. Ministry of Information decided to publish the letter banning Jamal from writing. And I think he found that very, very insulting.
You should remember that Jamal was banned from tweeting and writing articles while he is in Saudi Arabia because he stood for the Arab Spring.
After he left Saudi Arabia, we met together and we spoke, and he was very supportive of the concept of democracy and the freedom and reconciliation, and we did work together on that kind of field.
So I think Mohammed bin Salman is doing the right things by introducing Vision 2030. Now he just has to do it right.
In the early 1980s, Jamal Khashoggi received a degree in business from Indiana State University. He then began working as a journalist, later serving as media advisor to Ambassador Prince Turki bin Faisal in Washington.
While he was in Istanbul to arrange our marriage, one of his sons came to visit him. He wanted to live in Istanbul, to be near his family.
Khashoggi had 4 children with his first wife. His second marriage also ended in divorce. In May 2010, he married Dr. Ala Nassif. Several months after Khashoggi left Saudi Arabia, that marriage also ended, amid rumours that the journalist had been put under official pressure to agree to the divorce.
He wasn't very happy. He was worried. He one time told me his 2 sons complained to him that they are held hostage because of him. They couldn't travel. He said they were both bankers and their work required them to travel and they could not leave the kingdom. Their passports were confiscated and they were blaming him. And that really caused lots of guilt. He told me he felt guilty that he's causing their stress and suffering.
In August 2017, Khashoggi tweeted for the first time from exile in the United States. I returned to writing and tweeting, grateful to His Highness the Minister of Information for his kind efforts, gratitude and loyalty to the Royal Crown Prince. No free pen is broken and no tweeter is silenced under his reign. Coming from a man in self-imposed exile, the tweet seemed confusing and raised questions about his relationship with his native country. Back in 2016, the Saudi authorities had banned Khashoggi from writing and tweeting. He was informed by Saud al-Qahtani, an advisor to the Crown Prince, in a telephone call, which Khashoggi later described in a television interview.
I realized how degrading it would be if I agreed to such a thing. That an official could prevent me from writing or tweeting over the phone.
In September 2017, Khashoggi started writing for The Washington Post. His column extended his readership and influence beyond the Middle East.
For the Saudis, I think this was the scariest thing. The guy writes for a paper that are read all over the world, that are read by decision makers in the US.
The image Mohammed bin Salman painted of himself in the West, in America, London and Paris, with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of public relations, was destroyed by Khashoggi's one single article in The Washington Post.
As we speak today, there are Saudi intellectuals and journalists jailed. Now nobody will dare to speak and criticize the reform they like.
Saudi intelligence was monitoring Khashoggi's writing and movements and were briefing the new Crown Prince and heir to the throne.
Everything I write as an honest advisor.
The Saudis tried to tempt the journalist to return. A source close to Khashoggi said that the Crown Prince's advisor, Saud al-Qahtani, contacted him twice by phone. He said that Mohammed bin Salman trusted Khashoggi implicitly and that the doors of the royal court would be open to him whenever he chose to return. The same source said that the Saudi government maintained communication with Khashoggi and made him several offers, including managing a Saudi-funded media network if he were to return.
Jamal knows the Saudi regime very well. He has been there. He has been serving in the embassy in London, the Saudi embassy in Washington. He was the editor of Al Watan newspaper. And I think his knowledge of the regime added credibility to his profession as a journalist when he spoke out.
Khashoggi continued his criticism of the Crown Prince in The Washington Post.
Jamal spoke to me 2 days before his murder that he is working with friends to establish a foundation for democracy in the Arab world, promoting the culture of democracy amongst the youth people, and also creating some form of societal reconciliation.
Khashoggi's efforts included supporting the project Electronic Bees with Canadian-based Saudi activist Omar Abdulaziz, who was seeking to counter the Saudi government's online harassment of critics of the regime.
During May and July 2018, many activists noticed that there was an organized attempt to attack them online, specifically on social media. Khashoggi was a key target, so I studied how those electronic attacks worked. I wanted to put together a project that aimed to stop them. I presented the idea to Jamal Khashoggi and he liked it, as did other people like Tariq al-Mutayri from Kuwait. We decided to establish a team that would counter those attacks. Khashoggi decided to support us and contributed $5,000 out of his own pocket to help fund the project.
In Istanbul, we spoke with a political scientist about another major project that Khashoggi launched from the Turkish city via a number of media platforms. We contacted several of Khashoggi's assistants, but they were reluctant to talk in detail because they didn't want to jeopardize the future of their project. Meanwhile, back in the Saudi capital of Riyadh, a small cell was formed to decide what to do about Khashoggi. They weighed up different options. As new information became available, they formulated a course of action. They decided to silence Khashoggi for good. In September, Jamal Khashoggi left the United States for what would be the last time. He boarded Turkish Airlines flight TK8 from Washington, arriving at Istanbul's Ataturk airport just before sunset on September 10th. He planned to stay until the 17th of October to finalise his wedding arrangements. The Turkish scholar Hatice Cengiz met Jamal Khashoggi when she interviewed him at a conference in Istanbul in May 2018. This was the first of several meetings. That summer, Jamal Khashoggi proposed, and she accepted.
Jamal was full of hope because he is about to get married. He wanted to establish new life. And he was telling me about the flat that he bought, the furniture that he is going to put in the flat, and the fact that he's going to the consulate to get some documents. And I joked with him and I said, you are younger 10 years than I have seen you before, because you have a new love story. And he laughed. And then he said, you know, we need that so we may continue our struggle for the new generation in the Arab world. And I felt that for now, Jamal is secure in his environment, in his personal life, in his inner self.
From Istanbul, Khashoggi went to London for several days, returning to Istanbul at 4:07 a.m. on Friday, the 28th of September. At 9:24 that morning, the couple went to the municipal office in the Fatih district to complete the formalities for their marriage.
We went to the municipal office together to get information about the marriage process and find out what documents we needed. We were told that in order to marry, we needed a certificate confirming that we were both single. Without that, we wouldn't be able to marry. And he would have to go to the Saudi consulate to get that certificate.
Jamal Khashoggi and Hatice Cengiz took a taxi to the Saudi consulate.
He left his phone with me before going in. I wasn't allowed to go in. Only people who had to obtain paperwork were permitted to enter. He stayed inside for about an hour. I was relieved. We were both relieved when he came out of the consulate. He said that they had treated him well.
During his 90-minute visit at the consulate, Khashoggi was told his documents would be ready within the next few days. That same evening, he returned to London. He had spent less than a day in Istanbul. On the 29th of September, Khashoggi gave a talk at a symposium on the future of peace 25 years after the Oslo Accords. He posted 2 tweets about the event, and then what would be his last tweet.
Young Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, reached a deal with Kushner, and they even went as far as agreeing.
I was one of the last people to meet him before he disappeared. He was here with me in this office. We spent the day together, we had lunch together, and then he went to the airport. I followed him the following day to Istanbul because he was supposed to appear on my TV show. But by the time I arrived in Istanbul, he was gone. And I can tell you that when we met here, Jamal seemed quite comfortable and excited about the prospects of marriage. We discussed a project he had in mind, and that is to set up a website to publish translations of reports and articles and analyses on the economic situation in Saudi Arabia and the region.
In London, Khashoggi called the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. They told him that his papers were ready and he should come on Tuesday, October the 2nd at 1:30 p.m. to collect them. Khashoggi left London to return to Istanbul on what would be his final journey. On this visit, Khashoggi did not stay in an Istanbul hotel, but in the apartment he had bought for himself and Hatice to live after the wedding. Hatice had been busy moving furniture and supplies to the apartment. Only a few items remained, which Khashoggi planned to buy after his return from the consulate. The couple had breakfast at a restaurant in their residential complex. They had a lot to talk about, especially their upcoming wedding.
We discussed the wedding date and all the details, how to organize it and who to invite. I asked him if someone would go with him to the consulate, and he said he would go alone or with a friend. So I told him I would go with him and skip my university seminar. Then he called the consulate to confirm his appointment. They said they would call him back. Half an hour later, they called and gave him an appointment at 1 p.m. Then we took a taxi and went to the consulate.
The consulate was located almost 15 kilometers from the apartment. Meanwhile, in the early hours of that same morning, the planes carrying the team of assassins had arrived in Istanbul. 3 members of Mohammed bin Salman's Special Protection Unit came on a commercial flight from Cairo. 2 private jets coming from Riyadh landed an hour apart on a private runway. The first plane, with the tail registration HZSK1, landed at 3:30 a.m. carrying the head of the assassination team, Maher al-Mutrib, and 8 other men, including 2 of the key players. The team checked into 2 hotels near the Saudi consulate. Surveillance cameras in both hotels showed the men leaving at 9:40 and 10:15 a.m. Surveillance cameras at the consulate monitored their arrival.
Turkish authorities, let's say, leaked all the recordings that 2 planes came from Saudi Arabia to the international airport of Atatürk, and 15 men checked in a hotel in Istanbul, and before Khashoggi arrived to the consulate, they entered to the consulate with a car with a tilted window that you cannot see inside.
The fact that that team arrived in Turkey, the circumstances of what they actually did, the timings concerned, and also the composition of those people in terms of their forensic expertise, their ranking. One at least is alleged to be a very senior ranking intelligence officer. And the fact that it's also claimed that at least 7 of that team are extremely close in terms of the security inner circle of the Crown Prince himself. All of this is very strong circumstantial evidence. It all suggests that not only were these people implicated in the whatever has happened, it also suggests that what the intention actually was.
At 1:14 p.m, surveillance cameras showed Jamal Khashoggi entering the consulate. He gave Hatice his mobile phone and left her waiting for him outside. At 4 in the afternoon, Khashoggi had still not emerged. Hatice Cengiz contacted Yashin Aktay and Turan Kuşlakçı.
At 3:30 p.m, I started asking myself why Jamal hadn't come out. I got up and started walking around. I was checking the cars coming out of the consulate and trying to understand what was happening. I never thought that anything bad would happen or that anything like that could happen. I felt that something had gone wrong and started thinking about what to do. I went to the entrance and said that I was waiting for Jamal, who hadn't come out yet. The officers said that there was no one inside. Everyone had left. I asked myself what I should do. I found the consulate's phone number and called them. I said I was Jamal's fiancé and I was waiting at the entrance, but that he had gone inside and not come out. The officer hung up the phone and came to the door. He said, "There's no one inside. There's no point waiting." My legs started trembling and I thought about calling Mr. Yassin.
She said she was Jamal Khashoggi's fiancé, so I asked what had happened. She said Jamal had entered the consulate 5 hours earlier and still hadn't come out. That's when I knew there was a serious problem. I wasn't aware of how dangerous it might be for Khashoggi to go into the consulate. I told Hatice to wait until I made some calls. I called the Chief of General Intelligence, Hakan Fidan. Then I called the President's office, and I told some of Jamal's friends about what had happened. After about 3.5 hours of work on the part of the intelligence agency, it became clear that Jamal Khashoggi had disappeared.
Onun hakkında hemen herkes haberdar olmuş oldu.
As international speculation about Khashoggi's fate grew, one theory was that he had been kidnapped as part of an illegal operation to take him back to Saudi Arabia. The British daily, The Guardian, expressed concern that Khashoggi might have been detained, smuggled out of the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in a diplomatic vehicle, and then transferred back to Saudi Arabia.
According to the information we have, the Saudi citizen is still in the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul. We don't have any information besides that.
That statement by the Turkish presidential spokesman was made on October the 3rd, the day after Khashoggi failed to emerge from the Saudi consulate. 4 days later, President Erdogan said that Turkish prosecutors were conducting an extensive investigation, looking into all camera records and monitoring incoming and outgoing airport transits. He added that he still hoped for a positive outcome. Meanwhile, the Turkish Foreign Ministry had summoned the Saudi ambassador, demanding clarification on October the 4th. That resulted in the first official statement by the Saudi Consulate General in Istanbul. On Twitter, it said that the consulate was following up on media reports about the disappearance of the Saudi citizen and journalist Jamal Khashoggi after he left the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. It also said it was coordinating with Turkish authorities to, quote, uncover the facts behind his going missing after exiting. In a wide-ranging interview with Bloomberg News Agency just a day after Khashoggi's disappearance, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said, "My understanding is he entered and he got out after a few minutes or an hour." The Crown Prince also stated that Khashoggi was not inside the consulate, and he added, "If he were in Saudi Arabia, I would know that."
We kept going to the consulate for the first 3 days. We waited from morning till evening because we thought Jamal was inside. Then Saudi Arabia released a statement saying that Jamal had left a while after entering. This was during the first week. Then I stopped going there, as I believed that Jamal was no longer in the consulate. I thought they'd taken him to Saudi Arabia or somewhere else.
At the very first beginning of the event has been happened, Mr. Erdogan openly said that unless Kingdom of Saudi Arabian authorities clearly show that he has left the consulate, all the responsibilities belong to the Saudi Arabian authorities. And then you know that Saudi Arabian officials and their social media army started to propaganda about that Mr. Khashoggi has left the consulate, and this is a very detailed plan and action of Turkish intelligence agency. They are trying to blame Saudi Arabia and the other such kind of ridiculous story, fabricated stories.
The first report that Khashoggi had been killed surfaced 5 days after his disappearance. Reuters news agency quoted a Turkish official who said the initial assessment by Turkish police was that he had been murdered at the consulate and his body flown out of the country. The Saudi consulate issued a denial, saying that Jamal Khashoggi was neither inside the consulate nor in Saudi Arabia. It also denied that Khashoggi had been killed in the consulate and said every effort was being made to find him. On October the 6th, the Saudi consul in Istanbul, Mohammed al-Otaibi, invited reporters from Reuters to the consulate and accompanied them on a tour to confirm that Khashoggi was not inside the building. The consul denied reports of an assassination. He insisted Khashoggi had left the building but said he could not prove it because the consulate's surveillance cameras did not save images.
Then we understood that something is going wrong, because if someone is missing in your consulate, you have to prove that he went out of consulate with the video recordings.
But why you would have a CCTV system that isn't working, or rather doesn't record, seems impossible to believe. The only reason why you would not have a recording system is lack of money, and this isn't something that afflicts Saudi Arabia, for sure.
On Monday, October the 8th, US President Donald Trump issued his first public statement on the case. At the same time, the Saudi ambassador to the US, Prince Khalid bin Salman bin Abdulaziz, stated publicly that allegations claiming Khashoggi had been killed or detained by the Saudi authorities were completely false and unfounded. He then left for Saudi Arabia on the pretext of seeking clarification.
Just spoke with the King of Saudi Arabia. The king firmly denied any knowledge of it. He didn't really know. Maybe, I don't want to get into his mind, but it sounded to me like maybe these could have been rogue killers. Who knows?
From the first day, Trump administration wanted to give an exit to Mohammed bin Salman. Of course, we know the strong ties between Trump and Mohammed bin Salman, and we know that Trump started speaking about the rogue elements before even the Saudi government came up with this terminology. So he wanted to give them the exit, therefore they can use it in order to cover up the crime. And this, unfortunately, was the role of Trump administration.
I received an invitation from President Trump a few weeks after the incident. He invited me to the United States. I didn't see it as a positive gesture. I saw it as a political trick to get public opinion on his side. The United States should have done something to find out what really happened.
On October the 8th, the Turkish daily Yeni Shafak reported that the intelligence services were analysing the movement of 26 cars owned by the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. It said they wanted to determine their whereabouts on the day Jamal Khashoggi went missing. CCTV cameras close to the Saudi consulate showed two cars, a Mercedes Vito with the licence number 34CC1865 and another Mercedes with the licence number 34CC2248, driving to the Saudi consul's house an hour and 50 minutes after Khashoggi had entered the consulate. They were parked in the garage there for 3 days. On the 4th day, they were taken to a car wash near the consulate. We obtained these images from inside the car wash, showing the 2 vehicles being carefully cleaned. Turkish investigators believe that Khashoggi's dismembered body was transported from the consulate to the consul's house in the Mercedes Vito. Gruesome details began emerging in media reports on the 9th and 10th of October. In the US, the Washington Post published the CCTV video of Jamal Khashoggi entering the consulate at 1 p.m. on Tuesday the 2nd of October. On the 10th of October, the BBC reported that Turkish media had pictures and names of the men they said were members of the assassination squad. The New York Times also ran the story, reporting that Khashoggi had been dismembered with a bone saw 2 hours after his death, and that the orders to assassinate him had been issued from the highest levels of the Saudi royal court.
The hitmen said that they were tourists, but tourists don't normally go to the consulate for a few hours and then return to the airport. They first went to the hotel, then to Hamdiye Market here in Istanbul, where they purchased 16 or 20 large suitcases. Then they went to the consulate, then the consul's house, then to the hotel, and then they left. Their hotel reservation was for 4 days, but they stayed only 10 hours. Why is that?
When we saw those 15 guys' pictures and identifications, we realized that those guys are very close members of the Mohammed bin Salman's team as a bodyguard and the other issues.
11 days after Khashoggi's disappearance, Donald Trump was still insisting on CBS's 60 Minutes that the Crown Prince had denied any knowledge of what had happened, but he warned Saudi Arabia of severe repercussions if it were proven that Khashoggi had been killed.
There's something, you'll be surprised to hear me say that, there's something really terrible and disgusting about that if that were the case. So we're going to have to see. We're going to get to the bottom of it, and there will be severe punishment.
If they go on to claim that these people were acting without the authority of the Saudi government, then of course they can prove that by relinquishing the diplomatic immunity of these people and extraditing them to Turkey for trial. But if that happens, of course, there is a very big risk that those people who are put on trial for this capital offence will name the people that made the decisions, and that may not be convenient, of course, to the Saudi government.
On the same day, the British, French and German foreign ministers issued a joint statement calling for an independent investigation.
Of course, the governments in Britain and America would like to draw a line under this and pretend it hadn't happened. But I think public pressure is then forcing the media to then force the governments in the West to actually, at least in the short term, appear to be taking action. And that, of course, is an error of judgment from the Saudi perspective.
On October the 15th, the Saudi press agency reported that King Salman had received a phone call from Donald Trump, who had praised the progress of the Saudi-Turkish cooperation in investigating Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance. That same day, Saudi and Turkish officials entered the consulate. They arrived with a joint team led by Istanbul's Deputy General Prosecutor and counter-terrorism agents. That evening, Turkish forensic investigators were finally allowed to search the building. They worked 9 hours through the night until dawn on the 16th of October. The forensic team left carrying samples of soil and a metal door from the consulate garden. Media attention then quickly switched to the consul's house, which was also subjected to forensic inspection. On the 16th of October, the Consul General Mohammed al-Otaibi left Istanbul for Saudi Arabia amid rumours of his impending arrest.
After all those forensic investigation, Mr. Erdogan made a couple of telephone calls with international leaders, including the King Salman of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And after that, the Saudi Arabia had realized that the fabricated story of Khashoggi has left the consulate is incredible. So they accepted that Mr. Khashoggi has been killed inside the consulate.
Our camera team was able to monitor the frequent movement of Saudi security staff between the consulate and the consul's house from the 12th to the 17th of October. From this footage, we determined that this team included chemical expert Ahmed Abdul Aziz Al-Janabi and toxicologist Khaled Yahia Al-Zarani. They were among the group that Turkish media reported had deliberately destroyed evidence at the consulate and the consul's house. On October the 20th, after repeated denials, Saudi Arabia finally admitted that Jamal Khashoggi was dead. A statement by the Saudi public prosecutor announced the arrest of 18 Saudis for questioning and suggested an altercation and fistfight had led to Khashoggi's death. On October the 21st, King Salman and the Crown Prince made 2 phone calls to Salah Khashoggi, Jamal's son, to offer their condolences. On the 23rd of October, they summoned him and his brother Sahel Khashoggi to Riyadh, using the meeting as a photo opportunity. Ankara's strategy of leaking evidence finally brought the Saudi Attorney General Saud al-Mujib to Turkey. He arrived on the 29th of October on a private plane. He then held 2 meetings in the Judicial Palace with Istanbul's chief prosecutor, Irfan Fidan, whose office then made a formal statement. It said that there was no tangible result from these 2 meetings, despite all our efforts and good intentions to reveal the truth about the killing of Khashoggi in his country's consulate. The statement went on to say that immediately after entering the consulate, Jamal Khashoggi had been strangled to death as part of a premeditated plan, and that his body had been dismembered and disposed of. In the wake of the public prosecutor's statement, official positions in the case became entrenched. The Turkish authorities stood by their account of the events. Saudi Arabia continued to contest the leaks by the Turkish government. And the Trump administration continued to defend Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, anxious to protect US business interests. Some members of the US House and Senate defied the administration, criticizing Trump's actions and demanding that Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince be held to account. There was little response from Arab countries.
The CIA has concluded through its investigation that the Saudi Crown Prince ordered the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Trump administration touched off a new storm of criticism over the killing of Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi.
The U.S. has sanctioned some Saudis in response, but the Crown Prince has yet to face any punishment.
The passage of time has done little to diminish interest in the case. A United Nations investigation authenticated the audio recordings leaked by Turkish intelligence. These showed that Jamal Khashoggi entered the consulate at 1:15 p.m. on the 2nd of October. He went to the Consul General's office, where Mohammed al-Otaibi was with Maher al-Mutrib, an officer from the Saudi Foreign Ministry and a special guard to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. They questioned Khashoggi about his plans to return to Saudi Arabia. He said that he did want to return in the future. Then they said they would have to take him back, claiming there was an Interpol order to that effect. Khashoggi said there was no case against him and that he had people waiting for him outside the consulate. The recordings then document a short fight, followed by a conversation among the members of the assassination team. According to the UN investigation, Khashoggi was then injected with a sedative and suffocated with a plastic bag. Then a forensic pathologist on the team, Salah Al-Tubaigi, started dismembering Khashoggi's body. About 2 hours later, the audio recording picked up 3 different voices coming from the stairs. One ordered the visa lounge to be closed. Another man, believed to be an IT technician, transferred CCTV data and reset the surveillance cameras. The third was Mustafa al-Madani, Jamal Khashoggi's lookalike.
Jamal Khashoggi was a premeditated murder, and they're now telling CNN that they even believe the Saudis went to the extent of sending a body double here.
Al-Madani appeared to be complaining about wearing Khashoggi's clothes, shouting, "It's scary to wear the clothes of someone who was killed 20 minutes ago." Khashoggi's shoes didn't fit him properly, so the team leaders allowed him to keep his running shoes on. Al-Madani was instructed to walk along 4 streets before taking a taxi to the Sultan Ahmed district, where he disposed of Khashoggi's clothes. The results of the United Nations investigation were published in June 2019. The UN Special Rapporteur on Arbitrary Executions, Agnès Calamard, called for further investigations, saying there was credible evidence that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and other Saudi senior officials were liable for the killing. She said Khashoggi had been the victim of a deliberate, premeditated execution, an extrajudicial killing for which the state of Saudi Arabia was responsible under international human rights law.
Since he was killed, Jamal Khashoggi's body has yet to be found.
Saudi Arabia has denied any involvement in the disappearance of Khashoggi.
Turkish newspaper is now reporting that Khashoggi's Apple Watch recorded evidence of his murder.
Now the world waits to see how the United States will respond.
Dismembering his body. There needs to be some consequence.
Khashoggi's death was no accident.
أنا فقط أريد أن أكون كاتب مستقل.
All I want is to be an independent writer, not to be banned from writing while at home in Jeddah, or banned from appearing in the media, banned from publishing books. I felt I couldn't enjoy my freedom while remaining silent.